The year was 1997. A man named Reed Hastings walked into his local video store with nothing more than a plastic VHS case in his hand and a knot in his stomach. Inside that case sat a copy of Apollo 13. The movie itself was harmless, but the receipt stapled to the front carried a sting. $40 in late fees. For most people, it would have been an annoyance, shrugged off and forgotten. For Hastings, it was something else entirely. A spark. A small, humiliating penalty that carried the weight of a billion-dollar idea. Imagine the irony. One of the most successful empires in modern entertainment was ignited by the price of dinner at a roadside diner. That fine became the seed of Netflix. But here's the part that makes this story almost unbelievable. A few years later, Hastings would sit across a glossy conference table from the titans of Blockbuster, the very company profiting from those late fees, and offer them Netflix for $50 million. A bargain, considering the billions it would one day earn. The Blockbuster executives laughed. They sent him away, dismissing his scrappy DVD by mail idea as a joke. It was a laugh that would echo for years, haunting them as Netflix rose from obscurity to topple their empire. Because this wasn't just about DVDs. It wasn't just about avoiding late fees. It was about reimagining the way the world consumes stories. And Hastings wasn't alone. Alongside him was Marc Randolph, his co-founder, an entrepreneur with a taste for risk. Together, they began building something that seemed fragile, experimental, even silly. But underneath those red envelopes sliding into American mailboxes was a quiet revolution. A revolution Blockbuster never saw coming. What began with a $40 sting would snowball into a company that reshaped the very fabric of culture. How people spent evenings, how families gathered around screens, how entire industries rose and fell. But the journey wasn't smooth. At first, Netflix looked like a quirky side project, an oddball startup mailing discs in the shadow of a giant. Investors doubted it. Customers hesitated. And yet, the momentum grew. Because Hastings wasn't building a company. He was building a question. Why should watching a movie feel like a punishment when it could feel like freedom? That question would carry him from the humiliation of late fees to the bright lights of Silicon Valley, to Wall Street battles, to Hollywood studios trembling at his shadow. And here's the twist. Netflix's story is not just about business. It's about defiance. It's about what happens when the underdog refuses to stay small. That late fee wasn't the end of the movie. It was the opening scene. But what came after? That's the part even Hastings couldn't have scripted. The year was 1997, and Silicon Valley was buzzing with dot-com dreams. But in a small office in Scotts Valley, California, two men sat staring at an idea that sounded almost laughable. Renting movies through the mail. Reed Hastings, the math genius with a restless mind, and Marc Randolph, the seasoned entrepreneur who loved tinkering with business models, weren't trying to build a Hollywood empire. They were just testing a hunch. Could the rising new technology of DVDs, thin, shiny discs that had only recently arrived on store shelves, unlock a new way to watch movies at home? The gamble was simple in theory, but radical in practice. Instead of driving to a rental store, what if you clicked a few buttons on your computer, chose a movie, and it showed up in your mailbox the next day? No late fees, no awkward interactions with clerks, no, sorry, it's out of stock. It sounds obvious now, but in 1997, it sounded absurd. Blockbuster reigned supreme. With over 7,000 stores worldwide, its blue and yellow signs lit up neighborhoods like fast food chains. Families piled into minivans on Friday nights, walked through aisles of VHS tapes, and grabbed snacks at the counter. Renting movies wasn't just a business, it was a ritual. Who would trade that familiar ritual for waiting on the mail? Randolph remembered their first experiment vividly. They went to a music store, bought a CD, and slipped it into an envelope. If the US Postal Service could deliver it without breaking, then maybe DVDs could be shipped too. A day later, the disc arrived intact. No scratches, no cracks, just a shiny promise. That tiny test wasn't flashy. but it was enough to make them believe. Netflix was born with a mission that seemed almost quaint: to make movie rentals easier. But underneath, there was something bigger. Hastings hated late fees. Randolph hated inefficiency. Together, they weren't just building a service. They were declaring war on inconvenience itself. The early days were brutal. The dot-com bubble was inflating fast, and everyone had an idea. Most of those ideas were garbage, and investors were wary of the rest. Mailing DVDs? They said. Who cares? Customers were skeptical too. DVDs weren't yet mainstream, and few households owned DVD players. The company had to fight not only to sell its service, but also to wait for technology to catch up. Still, they pressed on. Their first model was a classic rental business. Pay per movie, keep it for a week, return it. But Hastings and Randolph noticed something alarming. Customers weren't sticking around. The service was clunky, too much like the old system they were trying to replace. So they pivoted. In 1999, Netflix launched the subscription model. One flat monthly fee for unlimited rentals. No due dates, no late fees. Just pick a movie, watch it, send it back, and the next one was already on its way. The infamous red envelope became a cultural icon. It was bold, it was clean, it was addictive. And slowly, people began to notice. College students loved it. Busy parents loved it. Movie buffs loved the ever-growing library. Each red envelope sliding into a mailbox was like a silent protest against Blockbuster's monopoly. But behind the scenes, the financial strain was crushing. Shipping discs wasn't cheap. Licensing content wasn't cheap. And Silicon Valley investors still weren't convinced this scrappy DVD startup could compete with a corporate giant that earned billions every year. At one point, Netflix was burning through so much cash that even Hastings questioned if it could survive. Randolph later admitted that they considered selling out or shutting down entirely, but they didn't. Instead, they doubled down. They fine-tuned their website. They built algorithms to recommend movies, keeping subscribers hooked. They obsessed over packaging to reduce postage costs by pennies. Every detail mattered because survival depended on it. And beneath the struggle, one truth became clear. Netflix wasn't just another rental service. It was a philosophy. Convenience, freedom, and choice. By the year 2000, Netflix had gained momentum. It wasn't profitable yet, but it was alive. And in the brutal jungle of startups, sometimes staying alive is the boldest achievement of all. Still, Netflix remained a mosquito compared to the giant it was poking. Blockbuster was making billions. Netflix was bleeding cash. The gap looked impossible to close. But then came a meeting that would change everything. A meeting so infamous that it has become Silicon Valley legend. Because Hastings, tired of scraping by, decided to walk straight into the lion's den and make Blockbuster an offer. The year was 2000. Netflix was limping, burning through cash, clinging to life. Blockbuster, on the other hand, was a colossus. With more than 60,000 employees and nearly 9,000 stores worldwide, it was pulling in over $6 billion in annual revenue. The blue and yellow glow of Blockbuster signs lit up every suburb in America. For most families, Friday night didn't mean Netflix. It meant Blockbuster. Reed Hastings knew the math. He couldn't fight a giant like this forever. Netflix had just 300,000 subscribers and mounting losses. Bankruptcy loomed. Something had to give. So Hastings did something bold, desperate even. He reached out to Blockbuster and requested a meeting. The pitch was simple. Let Blockbuster buy Netflix for $50 million. Netflix would become the online arm of Blockbuster, while Blockbuster's massive brand and resources would keep both companies thriving. It seemed like the perfect match. The meeting was set in Dallas. Picture the scene. Hastings and his small team walking into Blockbuster's sleek headquarters, dwarfed by glass towers and corporate polish. On the other side of the table sat Blockbuster's executives, sharp suits, confident smiles, men who believed they owned Friday night. Hastings laid it out. Netflix was bleeding money, but had the technology, the website, the early user base. Blockbuster had stores, brand power, and cash. Together, they could crush the competition and dominate the future of home entertainment. And then, the laughter. One Blockbuster executive smirked, then chuckled. Another shook his head in disbelief. They thought Hastings was joking. $50 million for a struggling DVD rental service? To them, it was absurd. Less than a rounding error in Blockbuster's books. They dismissed the offer, waved him away, and sent him back to California. That moment has gone down as one of the greatest missed opportunities in business history. What Blockbuster didn't see was that Netflix wasn't just a mail-order company. It was a glimpse of the future. A future that Blockbuster, blinded by its own success, couldn't imagine. At the time, Blockbuster was doubling down on its brick-and-mortar empire. Late fees were its lifeblood, a billion-dollar revenue stream. Why would they kill the golden goose by embracing a model that eliminated them? But customers were growing restless. They were tired of late fees, tired of wasted trips to empty shelves. Netflix's subscription model, while small, was quietly planting seeds of loyalty. Every red envelope that landed in a mailbox whispered a promise: freedom. Blockbuster didn't hear it. Hastings did. In 2002, Netflix went public. The IPO raised $82.5 million, giving the company the breathing room it needed to survive. Wall Street still didn't quite believe. Shares opened at $15, dipped, and wavered. But Netflix was still alive, still growing, and still betting on the future. Meanwhile, Blockbuster had its own internal battles. In 2004, a new CEO, John Antioco, tried to launch Blockbuster Online, a direct competitor to Netflix. On paper, it looked promising. They eliminated late fees and offered DVD by mail. For a brief moment, Blockbuster seemed to fight back, but it was too little, too late. Internal politics, cost-cutting, and pressure from shareholders crippled the effort. The very thing Hastings had warned them about, the digital shift, was happening faster than they could manage. And Blockbuster, with its massive overhead of stores and employees, couldn't pivot fast enough. By 2005, Netflix had over 4 million subscribers. By 2007, the company announced a new feature that would change everything again: streaming. No more waiting for the mail. Movies delivered instantly over the internet. It was the beginning of the end for Blockbuster. But here's the cruel irony. In 2010, Blockbuster finally declared bankruptcy. That same year, Netflix was surging past 20 million subscribers, its stock price skyrocketing, its empire expanding. The company Blockbuster laughed out of the room was now preparing its victory lap. And yet, even as streaming began, nobody could have predicted just how much further Netflix was willing to go. Because Hastings wasn't content with delivering other people's movies. He wanted to create his own. And that decision would launch one of the boldest gambles in entertainment history. It was January 2007, and Netflix made an announcement that sounded almost like science fiction. DVDs by mail had worked. The red envelopes had become part of American culture. But Reed Hastings wasn't satisfied. He was restless, obsessed with the question, what comes next? The answer arrived in the form of streaming. Instead of waiting for the mailman, Netflix subscribers could now watch movies instantly on their computers. No discs, no postage, just a click. The launch was small. At first, the library was tiny, only about 1,000 titles, and the technology was clunky. Internet speeds in 2007 were slow. Video quality was fuzzy, and most people still preferred the crisp feel of a DVD. To many, it looked like another gimmick, but Hastings saw something no one else did. He believed the internet wasn't just a tool. It was the stage for the next era of storytelling. Netflix was betting big on a future no one could quite picture yet. Hollywood, at the time, didn't take it seriously. Studios were happy to license content. To them, Netflix was a quirky little company that posed no threat to their billion-dollar business model. If Netflix wanted to pay for old shows and forgotten movies, why not? Extra cash for dusty content. That arrogance became Netflix's opening. The service began to grow quietly. Each year, internet speeds improved. Each year, computers got faster. Soon, video game consoles, smart TVs, and phones started supporting streaming apps. Netflix wasn't just mailing DVDs anymore. It was living inside people's homes, on their screens, ready at the push of a button. By 2010, Netflix streaming was no longer a novelty. It was an expectation. Binge watching, a term barely used before, became part of everyday language. People didn't just rent a movie anymore. They consumed entire seasons of television in one weekend. It was addictive. It was revolutionary. And it was rewriting the rules of how stories were delivered. But this shift came at a cost. DVDs, once Netflix's bread and butter, began to decline. Hastings knew he couldn't cling to the old model forever. He had to push harder into streaming, even if it meant cannibalizing the very business that had saved the company. Investors were nervous. Competitors were circling. Amazon was experimenting with video. Hulu had launched with backing from NBC, Fox, and Disney. Everyone wanted a piece of the digital future. But Netflix had one advantage the others didn't: data. Every time someone pressed play, paused, rewound, or binged a full season, Netflix collected information. They knew what genres people loved, what actors drew attention, what story arcs kept viewers hooked. This wasn't guesswork anymore. It was science. And Hastings was preparing to use that science in a way no one expected. The company wasn't just going to stream other people's content. It was going to create its own. This was a terrifying leap. Netflix wasn't a studio. It wasn't in the business of making shows or managing actors. It had no experience competing with Hollywood's century-old system. But Hastings believed data gave them an edge. And in 2011, they placed a bet. Netflix studied viewing patterns. One show stood out, The West Wing. Another, films starring Kevin Spacey. Another, works directed by David Fincher. Put them together, and you had the ingredients for a potential hit. So Netflix made a decision that shocked the industry. They offered $100 million for 2 seasons of a political drama called House of Cards. No pilot episode, no testing, just data, confidence, and ambition. When the news broke, Hollywood scoffed. Studios mocked Netflix for throwing money around. They don't know what they're doing, people said. But Netflix did know. They weren't betting blind. They were betting on us, the viewers. And when House of Cards premiered in 2013, everything changed. For the first time, Netflix wasn't just delivering stories, it was writing them. And Hollywood realized too late that The Outsider wasn't just knocking at the door. It had already moved inside the house. But House of Cards was only the beginning. What came next would push Netflix from disruptor to global juggernaut. February 2013. A new show appeared on Netflix, and within hours, it changed television forever. House of Cards wasn't just another drama. It was Netflix's first original series. A sleek, sinister story about power, betrayal, and ambition in Washington, D.C. Kevin Spacey as Frank Underwood. Robin Wright as Claire. Directed by David Fincher. Produced with the kind of polish you'd expect from HBO. Not a DVD company turned streaming service. But the real shock wasn't the show itself. It was how it was released. Netflix didn't just drop one episode and make viewers wait week after week. It released the entire season, 13 episodes, in one go. Binge watching went from fringe behavior to mainstream overnight. Viewers devoured the show like a feast, staying up all night, canceling plans, talking about it online. For the first time, a company wasn't just responding to audience behavior, it was designing content around it. And here's the wild part. Netflix already knew this would work. They hadn't relied on studio instincts, test audiences, or gut feelings. They had relied on data. Years of streaming history told them exactly what viewers wanted. Political drama, Kevin Spacey, David Fincher's directing style. It was a gamble built on algorithms, not intuition. But make no mistake, it was still a gamble. Netflix spent $100 million on House of Cards. For a company that had only recently been a scrappy startup mailing DVDs, this was astronomical. If the show flopped, it could have crippled them. If it succeeded, it could launch them into the stratosphere. And succeed it did. House of Cards won Emmys. It earned Golden Globes. Suddenly, Netflix wasn't the outsider anymore. It was in the same conversation as HBO, Showtime, and the major networks. Hollywood, once dismissive, now felt a tremor of fear. But Hastings wasn't celebrating quietly. He was already planning the next moves. Netflix doubled down on originals. Orange is the New Black, Narcos, Stranger Things. Each series wasn't just entertainment. It was proof that Netflix could manufacture global obsession. Hashtag meta. Hollywood still clung to its weekly release model, drip-feeding audiences one episode at a time. Netflix, meanwhile, handed people the keys to the vault, all episodes all at once. It was television tailored for the internet age, where patience was fading and control belonged to the viewer. But with great ambition came great cost. Original programming was expensive. Netflix began pouring billions into production. By 2017, it was spending over $6 billion a year on content, outspending many established studios. Investors worried. Could the company sustain this spending spree? Could subscribers alone fund such an empire? Hastings didn't flinch. He believed content was the moat, the fortress wall that would protect Netflix from competitors. If they had the shows people couldn't live without, then people would keep subscribing. And as Netflix's catalog grew, something extraordinary happened. The company wasn't just producing American hits, it began to look abroad. In Spain, a crime drama called La Casa de Papel, Money Heist, was floundering on local television. Netflix acquired it, rebranded it, and unleashed it on a global stage. Suddenly, it wasn't just a Spanish show. It was an international phenomenon. Red jumpsuits and Salvador Dali masks became cultural icons. In South Korea, Netflix invested in bold local productions. The result was Squid Game, a show that stunned the world in 2021, becoming the most watched series in Netflix history. This wasn't just smart business, it was a declaration. Netflix was no longer an American company exporting shows overseas. It was a global storyteller, collecting voices from every corner of the planet and amplifying them. And all of it traced back to that first risky decision: House of Cards. The $100 million bet proved one thing: Netflix could make hits. But could it dominate the entire world's attention? The answer would be revealed in the years that followed, as Netflix marched into new markets, new cultures, and new living rooms across the globe. And soon, the company that started with a single DVD in the mail would be sitting on the throne of worldwide entertainment. By the mid-2010s, Netflix was no longer just a scrappy Silicon Valley experiment. It had become a cultural phenomenon, and it was hungry for more. In 2016, Netflix flipped a switch and, almost overnight, expanded into 130 new countries. From Brazil to India, from South Korea to South Africa. The red N appeared on screens where Blockbuster's blue and yellow sign had never even existed. Suddenly, Netflix wasn't simply an American success story. It was a global force. But entering new markets wasn't just about planting flags. It was about telling stories that resonated across borders. Take Spain, for example. A crime drama called La Casa de Papel, Money Heist, had fizzled out on Spanish TV, canceled after poor ratings. Netflix bought the rights, rebranded it as a Netflix original, and pushed it to subscribers around the globe. Within months, it became a worldwide obsession. Fans from Mexico to Mumbai donned red jumpsuits and Salvador Dali masks, chanting "Bella Ciao" in unison. The show didn't just entertain, it united audiences across cultures. Then came South Korea. Netflix poured hundreds of millions into Korean dramas, betting that their mix of emotional storytelling and cinematic flair could capture hearts worldwide. The gamble paid off. In 2021, Squid Game exploded onto the scene. Within weeks, it became the most watched series in Netflix history, streamed in over 90 countries. The show's eerie playground games, desperate characters, and shocking twists dominated social media feeds, Halloween costumes, and late-night conversations everywhere. This was Netflix's secret weapon, local stories with global reach. Traditional Hollywood studios had long believed that international markets only wanted American content. But Netflix flipped the script. Instead of forcing US shows onto the world, it invested in local talent and gave their stories a platform. Suddenly, a Spanish heist, a German time travel thriller, Dark, and a South Korean dystopia were captivating viewers who might never have discovered them otherwise. The effect was seismic. Netflix wasn't just exporting culture, it was creating a shared cultural language, one binge at a time. But with global domination came challenges. The cost of content skyrocketed. By 2018, Netflix was spending more than $12 billion annually on original programming. Debt piled up. Critics warned of a bubble. Could the company really sustain such aggressive spending while charging subscribers only a few dollars a month? Competitors smelled this. Amazon Prime Video. The streaming battlefield was suddenly crowded with deep-pocketed rivals. For a moment, the empire looked vulnerable. Yet Netflix had an edge no one else could match: scale. By 2020, the platform had over 180 million subscribers. Every month, billions of hours of content were streamed, feeding algorithms that grew sharper with every click. Netflix knew its audience intimately, from the thrill-seekers who binged crime dramas to the romantics who devoured holiday rom-coms. That data wasn't just a tool, it was a weapon, and Hastings wielded it with precision. When the pandemic struck in 2020, theaters went dark, productions stalled, and the world turned inward. While Hollywood scrambled, Netflix surged. Trapped at home, millions of people signed up. Netflix became the campfire the world gathered around in isolation. Shows like Tiger King and The Queen's Gambit didn't just entertain, they became cultural events, uniting people in conversations that spanned continents. By now, Netflix wasn't simply a service, it was part of the global psyche. Still, behind the triumph, storm clouds were forming. The debt burden grew heavier. Subscriber growth began to slow in North America. New rivals gained ground, and whispers spread. Had Netflix peaked? The company's survival hinged on one thing: leadership. The vision of the man who started it all. Because while Netflix's global story was dazzling, the real story was also personal. Reed Hastings, the quiet billionaire behind the empire, had carried Netflix from a $40 late fee to world domination. But how he led, how he thought, and how he built one of the most daring companies of the 21st century, that was a story of its own, and it was about to be told. Behind the red envelopes, the streaming algorithms, and the global hits, there has always been one constant: Reed Hastings. Unlike the flashy moguls of Silicon Valley who thrive on the spotlight, Hastings has always been something of an enigma. Tall, lean, with a calm demeanor, he doesn't look like the man who took on Hollywood and won. Yet, his quiet intensity hides a relentless ambition that has shaped Netflix into the cultural force it is today. Hastings wasn't born into wealth. Raised in Boston, he studied math at Bowdoin College before serving in the Peace Corps, teaching high school in Swaziland. That experience, living simply, adapting to challenges, shaped his worldview. He came back to the United States not chasing money, but searching for problems to solve. His first startup, Pure Software, was a roller coaster. The company grew fast, but eventually stumbled, teaching Hastings painful lessons about management and scaling. He sold it for hundreds of millions, but the scars lingered. He vowed that if he ever ran another company, he would build a culture flexible enough to survive success and failure. That vow became the DNA of Netflix. Hastings believed in radical honesty. He encouraged employees to criticize openly, to take risks, to fail fast. He built what became known as the Netflix Culture Deck, a document so influential that Sheryl Sandberg once called it one of the most important documents ever to come out of Silicon Valley. Its core message was clear: freedom with responsibility. Hire the best, give them space, and demand excellence. It was unconventional, it was ruthless, and it worked. Under Hastings, Netflix didn't just grow, it transformed. From mailing DVDs to streaming to producing its own shows, the company pivoted again and again, never clinging to the past. And at every step, Hastings made choices that others considered reckless, like spending $100 million on House of Cards. #Meta, like pouring billions into global content when investors balked. Like letting algorithms, not executives, guide creative bets. Those risks made him a billionaire many times over. By the late 2010s, Hastings' net worth soared past $6 billion, cementing him among the tech elite. But wealth was never his obsession. His obsession was scale, the thrill of seeing an idea ripple across the planet. Colleagues described him as disciplined, almost monk-like. He preferred quiet mornings of meditation, long swims, and strategy meetings stripped of fluff. No grand speeches, no theatrics, just clarity of vision. And yet, beneath that discipline, he was a disruptor to the core. He relished challenging tradition, whether it was Hollywood's release model, cable television's pricing, or corporate bureaucracy itself. But leadership wasn't without strain. As competitors piled into streaming, Disney, Amazon, Apple, HBO, Netflix came under siege. Growth slowed, debt ballooned, and critics wondered if Hastings' empire could endure. In 2022, the company lost subscribers for the first time in over a decade. The stock plummeted. Analysts declared the golden age of Netflix over. And yet, Hastings remained calm. He pointed to the bigger picture: 200 million subscribers worldwide, countless cultural touchstones, and a brand that had become a verb. The setbacks were real, but so was the resilience. Netflix had been counted out before. It had survived Blockbuster, Wall Street doubts, and global skepticism. Why stop believing now? In January 2023, Hastings stepped down as co-CEO, passing the torch to Ted Sarandos and Greg Peters. But his fingerprints remained everywhere, in the company's culture, its strategy, and its restless pursuit of the next frontier. Because for Hastings, Netflix was never just about movies or shows. It was about imagination, about asking why things had to be the way they were, and daring to reinvent them. From a Peace Corps volunteer in Africa, to a struggling entrepreneur hit with a $40 late fee, to a billionaire who reshaped how billions of people consume stories, Hastings' journey is proof that sometimes the smallest frustrations can ignite the biggest revolutions. And his story leaves one final question hanging in the air. If a late fee could create Netflix, what might the next spark ignite? From a $40 late fee to a global empire, the rise of Netflix is more than a business story. It's a parable about imagination, persistence, and the refusal to accept limits. Reed Hastings didn't invent movies. He didn't invent television. What he reinvented was possibility. He asked a simple question: why should watching a story feel like a punishment? And used it to flip an entire industry on its head. Along the way, Netflix toppled a corporate giant in Blockbuster, outmaneuvered Hollywood studios, and reshaped the very rhythm of culture. Friday nights changed. Family living rooms changed. The way we talk about stories, binging, streaming, sharing across continents. All of it became woven into daily life because of one stubborn idea. But the legacy of Netflix isn't just the technology or the shows. It's the reminder that innovation doesn't start with wealth or power. It starts with frustration, with a question, with the audacity to believe things can be different. The red envelopes, the autoplay countdown, the global obsessions like Squid Game and Money Heist. They're all pieces of a bigger truth, that a company born in obscurity can grow to touch billions, not by following the rules, but by rewriting them. And Hastings himself, the billionaire behind it all, leaves behind a lesson that goes beyond business. Disruption is never about size. It's about vision, about the willingness to risk everything on the belief that tomorrow doesn't have to look like today. And Netflix may face challenges ahead. Rivals with deep pockets, shifting markets, new technologies. The empire may rise and fall, as all empires do. But the idea that sparked it, the spirit of challenging the ordinary, will endure. Because Netflix isn't just a company anymore. It's a symbol, a reminder that even the smallest sparks, a late fee, a canceled TV show, a discarded foreign drama, can ignite revolutions that echo across the world. The story of Netflix ends where it began, with a question. Not, what happens if we fail? But, what if we succeed? And in answering that, Reed Hastings and Netflix didn't just change how we watch, they changed how we dream.